Hello and welcome to the Daily Signal's Facebook Live. I'm Rob Bluey, Editor-in-Chief of the Daily Signal, and we're coming to you live today from the Heritage Foundation here on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. We're joined today by a special guest, the FCC Chairman, Ajit Pai. The Federal Communications Commission plays a big role in all of our lives because you regulate radio, TV, cable, wire, and satellite communications, and you have some major news to share with us this morning, and that involves your Restoring Internet Freedom order. So I want to begin with that. Let's just jump right in. We do have some questions from our viewers and encourage you to leave a comment if you have a question for the chairman. But tell us what this order is.
It is essentially my proposal to repeal the Obama administration's heavy-handed regulations adopted 2 years ago on a party line vote that regulated the Internet. And what I'm proposing to do is to get rid of those regulations and to return to the bipartisan light touch framework that governed the Internet starting in the Clinton administration and continuing all the way to 2015.
Now, you have been working on this for quite some time.
Yeah.
You earlier this year outlined some of the principles that you wanted to see as chairman of the FCC. Why do it now? What's the motivating factor right now?
Well, we did have a chance to take a stock of the record, all the facts that were in the record, and we want to make the right judgment because the Internet is so important in all of our lives. And so we obviously want to have a free and open Internet. We want to have investment in infrastructure, and we want to be consistent with the law. And I think you'll see when we release this order publicly tomorrow that this order does all three of those things.
Well, now, you raised something there because I think some of our viewers might be wondering, well, how does this affect me personally? What does this mean for me and my use of the Internet? So just looking at it from the perspective of an American out there, not necessarily somebody in Washington, D.C., what can you tell them?
Well, I would just say that the past is going to be prologue, that we had a free and open Internet before these regulations were imposed in 2015. We will have a free and open Internet along with massive investment in infrastructure, more innovation, and just better, faster, and cheaper services going forward. So I think it's a win for everybody.
Now, we have some questions from our audience.
Sure.
Before I get to those, I should note that this is an issue that has sparked tremendous interest among both the left and the right. And when the FCC has been open for public comments on this, you've seen them pour in.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at what some of our viewers. The first question comes from Casey, who asks, tech giants and other supporters of the existing rules say that they're necessary to ensuring that the Internet stay on a level playing field. How do you respond?
Well, I would say that innovation thrives the most when you have a light touch framework, such as the one that we had for 20 years. For example, Facebook and Amazon and Netflix and Google, those are now globally known names and brands, but they didn't exist 20 years ago, and they developed precisely because we had a free market approach. We let all kinds of business models thrive and then took action as necessary against anti-competitive behavior. But we didn't preemptively regulate everything like a slow-moving utility. Had we done that, I dare say that a lot of these companies wouldn't have gotten off the ground or certainly wouldn't have grown so quickly.
What has, with the regulations being in place, put in place under the Obama era a couple of years ago, what has that meant for some of those things, though? Have you seen a pullback in terms of investment and in some of the advancements in technology?
We have, and we take a very careful look at the facts and do some economic analysis, and we find that investment in networks decreased below what it would have been had these rules not been imposed. Additionally, the FCC started all kinds of investigations into things like free data offerings, so wireless plans that want to exempt certain streaming services from your data limits. The FCC started investigating those, and so that ended up reducing consumer value because a lot of companies thought, well, we're afraid to innovate because the FCC might take action against us. And so both with respect to investment and innovation, we find that these heavy-handed rules based on the 1934 rules that were developed for Ma Bell have had a negative impact on consumers.
Okay. Next question comes from Jack, and he asks, what would this plan deal with telecommunication giants who wish to corner the market on service? So again, I think this is a concern we've heard from the left.
So two different answers to that. First and foremost, it will not happen because for a couple of different reasons. First, the FCC, as under my proposal, would require these companies to be completely transparent about their business practices. They have to reveal, for example, whether they're engaging in blocking and the like. Additionally, the Federal Trade Commission would be empowered to take action, just as they did prior to 2015. And secondly, if you're talking about cornering the market on service, that is not a question about Title II regulations of the FCC. That's a question about competition. competition. And that's exactly why over the last 10 months, we've been focused on getting much more competition into the marketplace as possible, using whatever technology, satellite or wireless or fixed wires or the like. I want all of these technologies to compete, but you won't have a fair chance of getting those smaller competitive entrants in if you heavily regulate this marketplace to begin with. Heavy regulation always benefits the entrenched incumbents much more than the upstarts.
How do those free market principles play into your role as chairman of the FCC?
It infuses everything I do, and I would like to think the agency does, because to me at least, if a marketplace is competitive, then the case for preemptive regulation is a lot weaker. I mean, to me at least, the FCC should be imposing rules on an entire industry only when there's a concrete case of market failure. The marketplace is so broken that there's no hope but for the FCC to step in and heavily regulate it. Well, if anything wasn't broken in 2015, it was the internet. We weren't living in some digital dystopia before three unelected bureaucrats decided to save the internet from these hypothetical harms. And so, to me at least, the free market, I think, has produced much more value than preemptive regulation ever has.
And yet you've had people like Senator Ted Cruz, who's famously called the Title II net neutrality regulations Obamacare for the internet. How would you describe the regulations, again, for our viewers who are trying to comprehend some of the complexity of this?
Well, I would simply say, do you think of the internet as being as fast-moving and as innovative as your water company, as your electric company, as your subway system? I mean, if so, that's exactly what these Title II common carrier regulations were designed to address, the slow-moving Ma Bell AT&T telephone monopoly of the 1930s. But that's not the internet that we have. Right now, I think that the internet is so innovative and dynamic that to slap these heavy-handed regulations on them is, I think, the sledgehammer being wielded against the proverbial fly.
Let's go to the next question. This one comes from Emily, and she asks, this plan includes a transparency requirement. Will this encourage more competition in the market?
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why it was important to us to include that component, because if the internet service provider that you're subscribing to is disclosing their business practices and you don't like those practices, you have a chance to switch to somebody else. And so, for example, if you have a wireless carrier that says, well, we're going to throttle certain kinds of content, you can switch to another provider that better meets your needs. And so that's part of the reason why transparency, backed up by Federal Trade Commission enforcement, is really important.
Okay. Well, let's take another question here from Thomas, and Thomas asks, some argue that the reversal of net neutrality rules will only benefit businesses and not consumers. How do you respond?
I could not disagree more. The fundamental issue with internet access that people have in America today is not that their internet service provider is blocking access to lawful content. It's that they don't have the fast, cheap internet service that they want. And so that's why repealing these heavy-handed regulations on internet service providers will give them a much stronger business case for spending scarce capital building out these networks. And I've been to parts of America, especially rural America and low-income urban America, where folks are on the wrong side of the digital divide. And my argument is imposing these regulations ends up squelching a lot of the competition and investment from these providers, and ultimately consumers are left holding the bag, either with slower internet service or no access at all. And so my hope, and you'll see based on some of the facts that we recite in the order, it's especially in these rural areas where smaller internet service providers, many of which no one has ever heard of, but these are the ones that are critical to providing access in rural communities and low-income urban communities. Those are the folks who are the most harmed by some of these heavy-handed regulations.
So I want to ask where it goes from here, because a couple of years ago there were complaints about the openness of the FCC, and some of these decisions were made, it seemed, behind closed doors, and the public didn't even see what you were voting on until after the vote took place. You are putting out the order today, tomorrow, and you're going to then provide 3 weeks. What will happen during that period before the commission actually takes its vote?
So it's going to be a big change from 2015. In 2015, as you pointed out, the FCC voted on these regulations, and only 2 weeks after the vote, formally released them so the American people could see. This time, we're putting the cart, again, after the horse, where it belongs. We are publicly releasing this information tomorrow so that all of the American people, not just the commissioners, can see it. And then on December 14th, we'll be voting at the FCC on whether to adopt my proposal to repeal these regulations.
Okay. Yeah. Taking a step back, you recently gave a speech at the Reagan Library, in which you talked about some of the principles and the changes that took place during the Reagan era. How much of those have played an influence in your chairmanship of the FCC. And if you could, just for our audience, to share what some of those were that you think were so meaningful.
To me at least, the Reagan administration was at the vanguard of defending free markets and innovation. And if you look at some of the debates in the 1980s, they weren't all that dissimilar from some of the things we're talking about today. And especially having had the chance to talk to both of President Reagan's FCC chairs, I can tell you they struggled with these issues too. We need to be able to convey the power of free markets, that free markets don't benefit businesses. They are ultimately much better for consumers because it gets government out of the way of innovation, allows business models to thrive, and ultimately unleashes value for consumers. And I think just as in the 1980s, we are going to see a digital revolution unleashed for consumers in 2017. The free markets, I think, have ultimately delivered much greater consumer welfare than preemptive regulation ever has.
Great. Well, if there's one last thing you want our viewers to know about this, is there anything you want to share with them?
Well, just that we had a free and open internet before these rules were imposed in 2015. We will have a free and open internet going forward, and we are going to continue to have the internet infrastructure that hopefully will become the envy of the world, not just in urban areas like Washington, D.C., but all across this country. We want all Americans to be connected with digital opportunity, and this proposal is one of the many steps to getting us there.
And of course, we'll be watching closely because I imagine, as we've seen in the past, there will be no shortage of challenges both in the courts and in Congress. I know that there are some Democrats who are already saying that they want to see a legislative solution to this. So
right.
The debate is far from over.
I suspect you're right.
Yeah. Well, happy Thanksgiving. It's great to have you here a couple of days before Thanksgiving. Thanks to all our viewers for tuning in today. Thank you for your questions. We always appreciate hearing from you. Again, leave a comment there on Facebook if you'd like to learn more, and we'll get back to you with our answer. Also encourage you to check out our research on this issue on heritage.org. And again, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you again soon.